Thank you very much, very much, Mike. My name is Joab Kose. I'm a security researcher. I do a lot of malware analysis. I also do incident response. I contribute in security journals. I am one of the authors for ISSA. I did publish one of the article last month. We met with Mike 2019 in Dallas conference, and we had like a chat. And actually, Mike did introduce me on stage. The reason why why I got into malware analysis is basically because of the influence of the professor I had back on campus when I was doing my master's. And I just think because of the kind of exposure and the workload that I used to get, kind of pushed me towards that direction. My area of research is basically on APT, the nation state cyber warfare and the global espionage, malware analysis, and all these trends we see with big headlines happening around the world. And so yeah, basically that's the reason I do everything I do in security. And my strength is in malware analysis and network security. So without further ado, I will share my screen and let's get started. So I do my research on daily basis, and when it comes to malware analysis, we see a lot of trends happening, the way in as much as we're trying to harden the security, the bad guy is also finding ways to change things to make their work easier. So today I wanted just to share some of the trends in the malware families and the techniques used to evade detection when it comes to malware. So I'll just take walk the walkthrough for this presentation. I'm going to look at the malware family, how they spread, how the techniques, some of the techniques used to evade detection when it comes to malware, how the malware, once they affect the system, how they communicate with the remote servers. And then, as Mike did say, we have a session Q&As, and we will wrap it up toward the end. So when we talk of malware families, we define the family where malware belongs based on the purpose, why, what the person who wrote that malware intended it to do. Some of the trends we are seeing, for this year, we see the top 6 malware which are the top trend, and I have we have the ransomware. These are the type of malware which encrypts data, and then the attacker will demand payment ransom so that they decrypt the encrypted data. We have the credential stealers. They access, copy, and steal authentication credentials. We have droppers. They extract, install, and potentially launch or execute one or more files. We have backdoor malware, and I think if you have been up to date, if you guys, I think just a few months ago, we had the SolarWinds breach, and what exactly happened, that was a backdoor that was used in one of the SolarWinds product, and then when they sent that one as a update to the clients, people use their product, that was a backdoor, and the bad guys were able to breach all the people are using that software. We have the downloader family. So this type of malware, this family of malware, they download and sometimes even launch files from specific addresses. One thing to remember is they don't support other functionalities, they don't give commands when you want to execute something. It's just they just launch files. And then finally, we have the launcher. So as you can see, based on these 6 top families that have been like, on the trend for like, this year since January. We have backdoors, like, take the bigger portion. So the reason we have this, because bad guys, they want like a way to get into the system and still find a way without being detected. And when they use the backdoor, this explains the reason why we have like, the high percentage here. So backdoors, like I did say in the last breach we had with the SolarWind, that was like a very clever way to put the backdoor. They did something we call supply chain attack. And what they did, they went to the producer. They went to the developer, which is SolarWind, and they injected like a piece of code for the Orion network software. So when SolarWind distributed that as a update, everyone who was using that software, like, had that backdoor in their system. And this, what we saw next was like, governmental organization, private organization, everyone was affected. Microsoft, even Fire. So this is what backdoor does. And when it comes to another trend that we see around, this might be like, 5% that we see as small, but this has been like, a very big increase when it comes to ransomware. We have seen like for the past 2 years, like there's a very big, that gap, like a very big increase when it comes to the number of infection we see when it comes to ransomware. I think in 2019, we are like a good number of infections in the United States. We are like in Texas, we are like in the local governments being infected and they paid a lot of money. In Florida, we are Rivera and Lake City. And this year, like we just had like pipeline, attack with the ransomware. So we are seeing like an increase in the trend when it comes to ransomware attack. And the motivation behind this explains like, the target for this kind of attack. We see ransomware being targeted towards the government institutions, healthcare, because these are the easy targets. They deal with critical, services. When put into ransomware, when they request for that money, they expect that will be, a quick, easy way to get the money. I think like they just like last week or like few weeks ago, the pipeline paid like a lot of money to one of the ransomware attack that put everything into standstill. So as you can see, like this trend goes, and these are just like top 6. We still have like, this portion of 25%. These are other malwares like, rootkits, and there's so many types. But I was just, wanted to base on this and just talk about that, like how do they communicate, like how do they get in the system, how do they spread from the person who creates them to the target, like the victim, so that they achieve the end goal for being created. So every time when we do malware analysis, we always look for the things we look for, because when we have an incident and we need to bring back things to normal, so first of all, we have what we call the time constraint. So we need to find the fastest way to understand what that malware does, and find a way to stop it from spreading and put things into control. So first things, these are the 4 things that we normally do. And in this presentation, I'll just like, measure mostly on 3. So we want to understand like how do they spread, like, how do they get like from the attackers side to the victims, system where they intended to go. And we know like the goal when somebody is creating, if I'm a bad guy and I'm creating this type of malware, my goal is like it will end up in someone's system or a network somewhere. So I have to come up with a way to make it like, that channel to make it get to that system. So we're going to be looking like how do they spread for that, and some of the trends that we've been seeing, like, and the last few months. And then we want to know, like, once we have this malware into the victim's system or network, how do they avoid detection? Like, can we just detect them and eliminate them? How long are they going to stay there? Some we have seen, some malwares or attack or breaches being detected after months or like even years. This is very clear when you look at these, nation state, APT, advanced persistent threats. They take like, several months, even years before being detected. And sometimes when we only realize after the breach, after the damage is done. So we want to know, like, how do they avoid detection, so that by understanding that, how can we stop that? And then once they're in the system, like, what do they do? Do they steal files? Do they just, like, have give like backdoors for somebody to access? Do they encrypt the files to prevent the person who is using the system from using that? So we want to understand, like, what is the action that malware does once it gets the system. And finally, when attacker gets in the system, they need a way to communicate with the system. Sometimes they just want to stay there and be like, low key, under the radar, and try to communicate, like we call it the C2, command and control. So you want to see, like, how do they do that without being detected? Which are some of the techniques they use to communicate, from the victims or those compromised machines to the remote server. So how do they spread? So based on the trends that we see, we haven't seen, like, a lot of change the techniques used to spread malware. What we see is just modification and enhancement in the already known techniques. And some of these techniques, are like, when it comes to phishing, like, we know, like, phishing, they will create something or try to make you click on something or send you an email or a text, but that hasn't changed that much. But what we see is the way uh, they make it, like, they make it look in a smart way to make the targeted person click on that. And how do they do this? They look for the weak targets. uh, they say, like, users are the weakest link in any system. So when it comes to phishing or social engineering, they always target the weakest link, which are the users. We see, like, the techniques used in phishing, especially when it comes to the URL. I think, like, the last time I was talking to one of my colleague, and if, for instance, if we have bank.com, at that URL, they will use, like, the letter A. They will just change that one and use another sign which looks like an A. So you'll just, like, read it like a bank, but without realizing. So it's still phishing, but it's just like you're trying to make it clever in a way that most people won't realize that. When it comes to social engineering, they always come up with different ways to make their target. They will do their research. They will know, like, okay, this person likes going to this kind of website. They watch these movies. They on the social media, and then they will use, like, a way to lead you into a compromise website, so that you click and give them a way to spread that malware. And then another way we see, like, the trend, we see how this spread of malware is through, insiders. This has taken notch, especially when it comes to this nation state. We have seen, like, people being bribed, people being, blackmailed. So it's not something new, like something we know, like, no, we have um, insiders. We could have somebody from within who could go rogue, but the way these attackers used to do that, they kind of, like, just trying to add something on top of that. So based on, like, the way this malware being spread, not much has changed, but what we know, like, is what is being modified. Another thing that we want to look at, like, so we know um, somebody created a malware, they found a way and it made it to the target system. But that's not the end goal. The end goal is like, how long can it stay there so that it gets like the job which it was intended to do be done. So there's so many techniques used to evade detection. I'm just gonna look at like 3 of them and go like, kind of deeper. So the first one is process injection. We call it the process hollowing. And what this means is like, the attacker will create a very a process which look like, like very innocent in a suspended state. And then it will suspend like an active process and replace it. So once you do that, for instance, let's say we have a process like a running process with a process ID of say 97, Internet Explorer. So attacker will create another process to replace that with the same name, but that process will have a different process ID. So it involved injecting like, malicious code into a suspended process in order to evade process-based defense, because most of the defense techniques being used is based on like, they will monitor the processes running. They want to know like, the system calls being requested by each process. So if a malicious process can mimic like, a legit process and get to call, those system calls, then the attacker wins. So this is one of the techniques. So this process involves now executing a bit record in the address space of a separate live process. And this is exactly how it happens. So on this side, we have the malware and then we have the process. So the attacker will create suspend process, and then it will allocate the process like, some memory of that process, and then it will write that process into the memory with a malicious code, and then it will kill the users. This is a asynchronous procedure call, and then this is where it replaces the legit process, and then it takes over. So without knowing, if you don't have like a system in place to, if you don't have a system in place to detect, sorry for that, to detect like, any sort of this hollowed process, they will stay inside us as long, like, for months, for years, without you knowing. So how do we get to know that? So we have system with like, they monitor the processes being called, the system, the requested system calls, and based on that, it can say like, okay, so this process pretends to be this process, but the system calls we are getting are not exactly what the process should be calling. So that's like, like a red flag. Another technique being used is, okay, so this is something new, and the TLS, the transport layer security. So we have seen some malware use this one to conceal their communication, how they communicate with the remote servers. So what we know is like TLS provide, like that security to the internet communication of the past decade. It uses a cryptographic protocol, and people have been moving like, instead of using like, for instance, the application layer, the HTTP, now people are being requested to use the secure HTTPS, because we believe like everything, when you talk like from a client to the server, that communication, everything that you send is encrypted. But like what's happening, we are seeing right now that these bad guys are taking advantage of that. They're adopting the TLS to prevent like, defenders from detecting and, trying to stop that sort of communication. What does that mean? It means that when it comes to malware screening, like when we do like, screening, we want to know like new malware or like what we know. the already existing malware with hashes and signatures, we can't actually say like we have safe domain or services when scanning malware, because most of the traditional firewall defenses based on uh, scanning, they won't detect that unless you're using like like a machine learning, deep learning, or sort of like AI based sort of firewall, because this is a trusted protocol. They're using the trusted protocol, which is TLS, to conceal their communication. So if you can't go like deeper than what we know, we won't be able to detect that. So when it comes to that, like malware communications fall basically into three categories. We have like they want to download additional malware. So once they get in the system, they want to bring in like other functionalities in the system so that they achieve bigger goals. They want to move, they have like lateral movement, and they want up and down. So they will need to find a way to get like privilege, that sort of privilege escalation. So how do they achieve that? So they want to download additional malware into the system. They maybe want to steal data. And finally, they want to communicate, sending instructions to trigger some specific functionalities from remote server somewhere. And we see like, some of those servers are also hosted in trusted platforms. So this is something that is, a trend that we see, and very kind of like, worrying, because what is trusted is now being used by the bad guys. This is something that like, research that is still underway, and we trying to see how to evade that. How do you know, okay, so who is using this secured platform, like this is a TLS? How do you know this is a bad guy and this is a legit guy? So that's one of the challenges we see trending. Another technique used to evade detection, this is fragmentation. So what happens is like, I will write a malware, and that malware will be meant specifically for a given system. Let's say this malware is meant to go and disrupt maybe specific, let's say let's talk like a Stacknext. So that was it was meant to attack that specific PCL. So when we do malware research, like we do analysis, most of the times we don't use like production platform. We use sandbox and all this virtualization environment. So when we have fragmented malware, they will only reassemble once they get to the target. They will check like this system, this is the target, we are looking for this specific system, maybe all the details which are put that. If it doesn't match that, it won't reassemble. So when you do the analysis of a fragmented malware, it will check all the the environment and see like, okay, this is not what I was sent to do. So it will just remain like like the fragment. So when you do like the analysis, everything will just look normal. So this is a way of also embedding detection, because you won't know like this is a malicious software, this is a legit, like a benign software, unless they are reassembled and do what they intended to do. So there's so many techniques being used, but like these three are on the trend, and we see like much trend is specifically with the one, the TLS, that still needs like a lot of research and guidance on how to approach that. So how do they communicate? Like the goal is, once I get my malware into the target system, I should be able to, if it was like a ransomware, I should be able to encrypt all the system. It was like a backdoor. I should get like, that backdoor to allow me to get in. If it was just like, like a keystroke, I should be able to get all those keystroke. It should do what it was built to do. But again, like sometimes you just want to stay low. You want to know, like, touch bases, see what is happening, do some research, learn about the victim, and wait for like, for a bigger catch. So sometimes the attackers, they want to remain undetected and still be able to communicate with the remote servers. So sometimes they just like, send commands. So the techniques they use to communicate with that, we call it the C2, command and control, and they have like several techniques they use to communicate with already compromised system. Like, so the goal here is to pretend that it's just normal, unexpected traffic, to not to be detected by all the the security layer in the place, and still be able to communicate with that remotely. So, what are some of the techniques being used? So to communicate, like we have seen several techniques, being used by attackers. So they use the application layer protocol, like the ones we just use. No, instead, like they will go to TLS, that HTTPS secured layer, and they will use that to conceal all the detection. Nobody will even realize like something bad is going on because we trust this. We have the certificates and everything. They use this application layer protocol to communicate with the remote servers. They try to blend in with the existing traffic, so that like when you monitor, like even if you do packet capture and you do like your analysis, you do like all that, you will just see like everything is normal because everything is encrypted. Sometimes they use like the web protocol to avoid detection and filter, like also try to blend in. Another technique that we see is like, they will take that traffic and then on top of it, they will add like some junk data to the protocol being used so that their C2 won't be detected. It will just look like normal. You just look at that traffic and you see there's nothing going on here because there are a lot of like, dummy data things you won't actually understand. And then lastly, what we look at is how do like, they will take the data and then fasticate that. They change that one, they make it like, not really encrypting it, but they make it super hard to understand. You look at that traffic is hidden, you don't see anything, but, or maybe you see something, but you can't like understand what is going on. Obfuscation doesn't mean like encrypting the data and like, it's just like in plain text, but is hidden in a way that is kind of, hard to understand. So all these trends we see, these are things which are here to stay for a while. And as much as like, we try to bring, harden the security, come up with ways to address these bad guys are also doing their research. We see these APTs, they're very skilled people. They have like, researchers. They do their research every day. They know what's happening, what's new. So something will come up and they will always find a way to get in. Because when we talk of security, we have to balance like, like that's CIA trial, like, we have confidentiality, integrity, and of course availability. So in as much as we want to make to have the integrity and confidentiality, we still have to make that asset we are protecting or like that data available to specific people. So we can't have like that 100% secured platform. And that is the challenge we're having, because as much as we're trying to raise the bar, these bad guys also like, on their side, they're raising the bar. So these are trends we see. And I just want to share, like, I've been following about like this ransomware thing going on, and I'm really concerned when it comes to the targets that they're turning on to. We see the healthcare, and if you look at the healthcare system, the way they were designed, is not like protecting other traditional assets. Like if you have your company, or you have, like, I don't know, other businesses, because in first of all, the hardware being used, and the way the system were designed. So there's a big challenge for that. And if one day they encrypt every, like, let's say like a healthcare or a hospital somewhere, actually there's no option, is as much as we say, like, no, don't pay. Um, they look for targets which will pay because you have people in, in emergency, people in health support. And as long as those systems are not working, and they demand the money, you will find a way to pay for them. They're also targeting the, critical infrastructure. We just saw that one the other day with the pipeline, and I don't know what's gonna happen next, but I think because when they call for that, they get paid, and that is just like a motivation for them. They will go low for some times, and then they will target something else bigger than that. So these are trends we are seeing coming, every day, and there's so many, other just not so, like, life-threatening sort of malwares, like, we have backdoors, people listening to what you're doing. We have keystroke, all these other like rootkits. We have all these, uh, so much is happening when in the malware, sector. And as we do all this research, we're trying to see like the trend. This is what's happening. What is the best way to, to protect that? And how do you stay ahead of the bad guy? Because once they're ahead of you, they will control everything you do. They will control, like, if they want you to pay them, if they want you to go offline, like, out of business for like a week or a month, they will do that. Because we are seeing some nation states, they are hiring, like, even they put it publicly, they're reaching for security researchers, people working for some governments, and they're offering them good money. So we see all these things happening, and the question we're asking, like, what's going to happen tomorrow if that happens? Like, how do we respond to that? How do we contain it? How do we put everything back to normal and make sure, like, things are moving forward? So that's, like, my share for this today. And I'm happy, like, to take questions, have like this sort of anything that has to do with the malware. If there's any question that will be super, I'll be very happy to answer that. Back to you, Mike.
Thanks, Joab. That was great. So I have a question. I spent a little time in the deception space, and one of the things that came up frequently was the time with which it takes to find an attacker. And the people I spoke with said the answer is always too long. I know it's like a couple of 100 days typically in a network. Is it possible to find malware, or is it impossible to find until effectively the attacker is moving laterally in a network?
Uh, that's a very good question, but my answer is it depends on the type of malware, the intention, and the person who wrote that, and also it depends on the system you have in place. I think, like, there is a breakthrough right now because, like, we're having like this deep learning, technology coming in, machine learning, and this is not like, like the traditional defense system that had to rely on, like, signatures and all that to detect. Like, if you get like a new malware, it will be super hard to detect. But that will depend on the system, like, the security you have in place, the level of the personnel, like the expertise you have, like, in your team. So it depends. I won't say like how long it take, but I know like there are breaches that have taken like, over a year, and they only realize uh, um, once they like everything is kaboom, like it's chaos.
Yep.
So it's hard to tell on that, but it will depend on like, the kind of system and the technology you have to secure your assets.
Got it. Okay, so next question up from Drew Daniels. He says, we all here and as security pros know that malware and ransomware, there are multiple ways these spread and attack, but what is the most popular? Is it phishing? Is it patching, obsolete software, rogue insiders, or something else?
So one thing that I forgot to mention is, so we have two types, like, broad, we have like, this public public malware and private malware. So when I talk of public, these are like, people build tools and put it publicly, and somebody will just come and try to use that and see what it does. There are those experts, people with skills, those researchers, they write their own code privately. Nobody understands how it does that. So phishing actually isn't like a malware, it's just a technique, like it's like a gateway to pave a way for the malware to get to the target. So phishing, I will just like, hey, open me the door, I want to get in, like, oh, can you just take my USB, just put it there. That's phishing, is a technique of getting inside. But when it comes to malware, so it will depend like the intention, what it does. Does it steal files from you? Does it just like listen to you, like, what you do every day? Does it give like a backdoor, so that like when somebody, the bad guy, wants to get into your system or your network to do something? So it will depend on the on the on the type of the malware and what it is built to do.
Okay, that makes sense. And next question up from Pete Bertrand, and he says, since we can't build impenetrable walls, what are some of the best techniques to quickly detect modern malware? Do we need to use multiple techniques?
I know of the techniques, like based on like what's happening right now. People are moving towards like, like deep um, deep learning. I know like, machine learning that's being brought in to detect malware. This is based on like, like on behavior. Like for instance, if I go into my computer, like everything, the way the computers are built, um, we have like, like the kernel, we have the user space and the kernel space, and I'm not supposed to interact directly with the kernel space from the user space. So what happens, there's a gap in between the user space and the kernel space. So when I talk of the kernel space, like in a layman language, this is like, you want to access maybe computing resources like your memory. You want to access processors. And when I talk of the user space, this is like what you interact with. Like if you want to go through your email or Gmail, or if you want to do whatever, like whatever you interact with. So in between these two spaces, there's a gap. So if you want to access to request for like maybe memory space, or if you want to request some files, you need to send something called a system call from the user space to the kernel space. So there's a technology coming in, like the deep learning. So we will collect all these system calls and train and see, okay, so this system call was requested by this process. Is this process allowed to request for that? So based on that analysis, it will tell you, okay, so this process, this is benign, so it is allowed. But this process we are seeing calling for these system calls, this looks malicious, so we will disallow it. So that's like based on the behavior, not just like you need like the traditional sort of security where like, you need to get like a malware, give it like a signature, hash it, put that signature. So next time when something comes, just hash it, then try to match it. If it matches, that doesn't work much like, today. but we see that technology when it comes to like, like deep learning and machine learning and sort of like AI coming in. So I think that is a technology that will come and help a lot.
That sounds good. I've got another question from Drew Daniels, and this one is, what's one thing we can take back to our companies and frankly our families to defend against, protect against malware? What's the one recommendation we can leave with today?
The recommendation, I think like every company, every organization, they try as much as they can to put like, all, they will pull all the resources they have to secure like their assets. But when it comes to malware, because you see on the trends, the high stress, like, so phishing, social engineering, and like insider. So the only way that malware will fight, it doesn't matter like how powerful or how complicated that malware is, it will only be effective once it gets the victim's system. But like we see, the pathway is through users. So I think like the organization should invest mostly on training their users to know, this training, like, awareness, like don't do this, put into place like, policies of what should be done at workplace and what shouldn't be done at workplace. And also like right now we see like the past 1 year, the challenge of like this sort of like remote work. And we know some people go with like, companies equipment, like computers, and work with that from home. That's another challenge. Like somebody will just go to the internet and with that same computer. So I think like training the users or your employees on what to do, it shouldn't be just like a 1 day thing or a 1 month thing. It should be that, consistent, like it should be like a policy, like every month, every week we do this training. And those policies also should have what we call like, if somebody doesn't abide the policies, what happens. So the takeaway is you should invest on the users, because that's like the weakest link to most of the companies we see.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, don't click that link. So next question is from Pep Baramida, and he says, does Joab recommend using multi-vendor EDR on desktop or laptops? Something like Symantec, SEPP/EDR, and FireEye's EDR agents simultaneously installed for almost close to perfect detection/protection. Security layers in terms of vendor solutions.
So there's something we call like the in-depth security. So you don't just rely on that, because you need to have like, okay, so you're gonna train the users, but you still need to have the security in place. You need to have the firewalls. You need to have like, EDRs. So if you're gonna be using the multi-vendor equipment, sorry for that, my light just, sorry. I hope you see me.
We're back.
Awesome. Sorry. So if you're using like a vendors, just make sure like, the integration of like, all these vendors, the way you integrate them and still achieve the end goal of protecting, the assets you're protecting. So it doesn't matter like whether you're using like just one vendor, or you have like 7 different vendors, so long as like you can integrate them and still achieve, the highest level of security. That for me is still a, so long. And also trust the vendors you're using, because one thing we are seeing also, like, there's a trend of these, we are having these nation states, and some of the states, they also use some of the companies they have. So you need to trust the vendor you're using. Like, is it like a trusted vendor? Is it like, a vendor who will like, compromise your company and all the assets? So my response to that is like, yes, it's good to use multi-vendor equipment, but also you need to trust the vendors you're using. the equipment.
So I have a question with regards to just being a malware expert in general. We have a lot of people on the call who are pretty hands-on security professionals. Where do you go to stay on top of the latest trends in malware? Where do you, maintain your edge, and where do you continue educating yourself to the threats that are out there?
To stay on top, I think like you just need to be up to date. I think first, like attending these conferences, just get to know, like people sharing what's happening. You get to know what's happening around. Um, what is secure today, or like maybe like last one up might not be secure in the next one up because there's somebody somewhere in the basement just trying to crack that. So just try to be up to date and open, like listen to all these, security companies, like all these guidelines they keep giving. We are like a breed patches and everything. Just like now, be on the outlook, see what's happening outside, and try to implement that one to the organization that you are in at.
That makes sense. And I have one final question, which is basically with regards to your career ongoing. Was just looking at your LinkedIn profile, and I noticed that you are in fact open to work. And you were in the United States, now you're back in Kenya. Are there any particular companies, or we've got a number of people on the call, some of whom are quite connected throughout the United States and internationally. Is there anything in particular that you're looking for that we might be able to make an introduction to?
Yes, thanks for that question. So I'm open, to any work. So I left the United States, and I've been like trying to get like a job. Like right now, what I'm doing is just like these part-time gigs and research. I'm not working for a specific company. The biggest challenge I've had with that is because when you are outside the United States, and you're not like a US citizen yet, it's hard to get, like when it comes to cybersecurity. Most of the jobs they need clearance, or they need you to have a green card, or like a citizenship. I'm open to any role which has to do with the incident response, security analyst. I'm looking for something to do with like malware analysis. Yeah, so if I can get like something to work on right now, which will allow me to work like while still outside the United States before I come back, I'm open to that. And thank you for that question, Mike.
Great. So yeah, everyone who's on the call, if you want, link in with Joab and see what he's into. That'd be great. I think I mentioned it before, but there's a lot of reasons why people join the ISSA. One of which is education and learning and kind of keeping on top of different things, and the other is networking. And we're great believers in that, and always happy to help.